In this lesson, we're going to discuss the use of BGP peer groups on Arista switches. Peer groups are a great way for us to tidy up our BGP configurations as well as apply BGP policy to a set of BGP neighbors. If we have several common options for multiple BGP neighbors, we can apply all of them in one simple command and then associate the neighbor to a peer group. Once assigned to a BGP peer group, the neighbor will inherit all the BGP policies that we define in that group. Some good examples are common route filtering policies, BGP timers, the use of a password, or send community, just to name a few. This not only saves time in configuration commands when first setting up a neighbor, but any future changes can simply be made within the BGP peer group, and then all BGP neighbors in that group will inherit that change. Arista supports both static BGP peer group configuration as well as dynamic BGP peer groups. Static BGP peer groups are as simple as the name implies. We can define a peer group and then configure BGP parameters within that peer group that will be associated to any neighbor assigned to that group. Let's configure a few static BGP peer groups. On switch 4, we'll create two peer groups, one called North Peers and one called South Peers. So we get into configuration mode with config and then router BGP 65004. And here we define the peer groups, neighbor, and the first one is North Peers space peer dash group, and then neighbor South Peers peer dash group. And we can verify our configuration with show run section router BGP. And in that output, we can see we now have a North Peers peer group as well as a South Peers peer group. Now let's place switch 4's BGP peering to switch 1 and switch 2 in the North Peers peer group, and the peering to switch 5 in the South Peers peer group. First, let's verify the existing status of our BGP peering with show IP BGP summary. And in that output, you can see that switch 4 has three neighbors. 200.5 is switch 1 and is AS 65001. 200.9 is switch 2 with AS 65002. And 200.22 is switch 5 with AS 65005. So to associate these neighbors to our new peer groups, the command is neighbor 172.16.200.5 peer-group and then the peer group name, North Peers. And for the next one, neighbor 172.16.200.9 peer-group North Peers. And then finally, neighbor 172.16.200.22 peer-group, and this one will be South Peers. Enter. Verification with show run section router BGP. And we can see now that 200.5 is tied to the North Peers peer group, as is 200.9, and then 200.22 is now in the South Peers peer group. Let's check the status of our BGP neighbors. Show IP BGP summary, and we can see all three neighbors are in the established state. However, their up-down timers have been reset, one at 50 seconds, one at 40, and the other at 29. So we can see that associating these neighbors to a peer group caused our BGP neighbor relationship to be reset. Dynamic peer groups is something we discussed in a previous lesson, but is easy enough to review here as a comparison to our static BGP peer group configuration. Recall that the configuration command is BGP space listen space range. For allocating a peer group, the neighbors will be dynamically added to rather than us having to configure each neighbor statement line by line. We still have that configuration saved on our switch 1 from our previous lab, so let's take a look at that. We'll log off switch 4, log in to switch 1, and show run section router BGP. And here we can see we have an example 1 peer group and an example 2 peer group. And then our dynamic BGP peer configuration is with the BGP listen range command, where example 1 was associated to remote AS 65003, and the peer group example 2 was for remote AS 65004. In addition to this output, you can also get information from the commands show IP BGP peer-group, enter, and then we can see BGP peer group example 1 and BGP peer group example 2. Let's apply a different BGP timer to the values within peer group example 1 as a final step in this lab to create a BGP policy and tie it to one of our BGP peer groups. So we'll get into configuration mode, config, enter, router BGP 65001, enter, and then our neighbor command. And this will be example 1 is the peer group we're going to make the configuration change to, and then timer and question mark. And you can see we have a keep alive interval. So here let's put in 1 space question mark, and then our hold time, and let's put in 3. So neighbor example 1 timers 1 and 3. And then we can verify that again with show run section router BGP, enter. And now under the example 1 peer group, we see we have timers 1 and 3. But example 2 peer group doesn't have that change, which is what we wanted. And now if we issue the command show IP BGP summary, we see that we have the two neighbors established, 65,003 and 65,004. And we can dig into what the peer group has applied to them with the show IP BGP neighbors command. And in that output, 200.2 now has a hold time of 3 and a keep alive of 1, which matches its configured hold time of 3 and keep alive interval of 1. Whereas 200.6, as part of the peer group example 2, still has a hold time of 180 and a keep alive interval of 60, which are the original defaults. As you can see, BGP peer groups are pretty easy to understand and to configure. They have the potential of saving us time not only in the initial project phase of configuring our BGP neighbor parameters, but also the added flexibility of saving us time in ongoing maintenance and operations of our BGP policy and the neighbors that specific policies need to be applied to. As always, be sure to refer to the most recent version of Arista's configuration guide, release notes, and TOIs, the transfer of information documents, to keep up to date on options associated with this feature.